So the first thing is, the boots are not for show. One of the things I'm going to be doing today is helping you with a little bit of grammar. For example, when two vowels go walking, the first one does the talking. You guys ever hear that? Because I always ask the question, when was the last time you ever had a cup of tea? Michael Ree. But I am a bit of a cowboy. I used to be in rodeo. I used to compete. My favorite event was steer wrestling. And steer wrestling is where you climb on back of a horse and they put you in a chute. And in the chute next to you, you have a great big bull. And they let the bull go, poof, out the chute, and he starts running. A couple seconds later, they open your chute, and you start going with your horse. And eventually, you catch up to the bull, you jump off of your horse, you grab the bull by the horns, and you take him down. I'm fairly certain that has prepared me to be an assurance provider for sustainability. Because I am constantly chasing the bull, and I'm constantly taking things down. So you're going to have to excuse me. Do I have a button or anything to press this, or I just indicate to you guys when to go to the next one? I don't get, thank you. I don't get a whole lot of opportunities to present at these sorts of things in South Africa. And it's because I've pretty much been pinged. Do you know what the term pinged means? PNG, persona non grata. So I have a habit of conducting research of all of the sustainability reporting of all of the GAC-listed companies every year for the past 16 years. And what we do is we first calculate what we refer to as a Sustainability Data Transparency Index score. Because we have 264 indicators. And 114 of those are indicators that we use for calculating this SDTI score. One of the indicators is number of employees. So, can someone explain to me why a mining company would not tell you in their annual reporting, remember they're listed companies, they must have an annual report, why a mining company wouldn't tell you how many people they employ? Because there are literally at least 3 companies, it might be 5 this last year, that do not tell you how many people they employ. In an industry that's fundamental to the economic strength of South Africa. And it's heavily reliant on people. Is anybody here from Zimplats? No? Anybody know of Zimplats? Zimplats is an amazing company. Because Zimplats is part of the Implats group, right? But when I used to be the assurance provider for Implats, I would go to the Implats mines in Rustenburg, and I would see more than twice as many employees doing the same work as the employees in Zimbabwe. Why? Because in South Africa, the unions are so strong, the OECD refers to the workforce in South Africa as the second most militant workforce in the world. The workers refuse to be multi-skilled. If I'm a rock drill operator, I've got a drill and I'm drilling holes in rocks. But you only need me when a hole needs to be drilled in a rock. So when I'm not drilling holes in rocks, I should be doing something else, right? Yeah, not in South Africa. But in Zimbabwe, people get multi-skilled 3, 4, 5 different tasks. So they're able to produce the same amount of platinum with far few person hours worked, which is incredibly important for an assurance provider to understand because person hours worked is the most common denominator for determining efficiency. And it doesn't matter whether that efficiency, just so you know this thing's not working, unless I'm not going the right way. Nope, not working. Okay. So, doesn't matter whether you're doing carbon efficiency or you're doing lost time injury frequency rate. Lost time injury frequency rate. How many people know of that indicator? Anybody? A couple of people? Lost time injury frequency rate is the benchmark standard for determining how safe a company is or is not. We calculate it, thank you, per 200,000 person hours worked. Can anybody guess why we would use 200,000 person hours worked as the denominator for determining lost time injury frequency rate? Nope. Because globally, the average person gets 2 weeks of leave a year, which means they work 50 weeks a year. The average person works 8 hours a day, 5 days a week. So they work 40 hours a week for 50 weeks a year. 40 times 50 is 2,000. So 200,000 is 100 people working for the year. So when you have a lost time injury frequency rate, and let's just say it's 1.0, it means that 1.0 out of every 100 people get injured to the point of losing at least 1 day. If we can use person hours worked as the denominator for all safety efficiencies, why can't we use it for carbon? Because typically carbon, companies, like the CDP was just out of its tree. Like the CDP was a monumental waste of time and money. I'm sure you all know that the CDP's all fallen apart. It's taken over by the TCFD, thank God. But anybody who produces a CDP submission in today's world is wasting their time. And I was a critic of CDP from the get-go because one of the things that they would ask you to do is to provide a carbon efficiency, and then they would give you some examples of denominators that you could use. And one of them was square meterage. Most of you are accountants? Any of your accountancy firms conduct their own sustainability data collection and analysis? Anybody? So here's the thing. If your company did its own sustainability report and was talking about its carbon efficiency, and they were saying that we produce, say, 5 tons of carbon per square meter per annum, the easiest way to improve your efficiency is to take your people and shove more of them into less space, thereby pissing them off, making them want to leave, and being totally counterproductive to what you're trying to achieve with carbon efficiency. These are all things that an assurance provider should know. They should understand the context in which we're reporting. Can anybody tell me what date, a very specific date in history, you can link the mandatory financial audit? Come on, you bunch of accountants here. Who can give me the date? 29th of October, 1929? What was it? The stock exchange crash in the United States led to the Great Depression. Why did we need the mandatory financial audit? Because a lot of people were speculating on stocks. Stocks as we know them today were traded as a result of the First World War. War bonds. When the governments were at war, they went around their countries trying to raise money to support the war effort, and they would sell war bonds. And they would get people to buy these bonds, and they would promise them some interest. Not a great amount of interest, but they would promise them some interest. And they would bring the war heroes back from the field, and they would send them out to promote these war bonds. And thousands upon thousands upon thousands of people bought these war bonds. And J.P. Morgan at the end of the war said, wait a second, why can't we do this with shares? Because historically, the trading of shares in companies was not 1/1,000,000th piece of paper. It was like 10% share of the company or 25% share of the company. Have you all seen, what is it called, Shark's Tank or Dragon's Den? Right? That's how share trading worked in the past. Companies would come to wealthy people and they'd say, this is my business, I value it at this much. I'll give you 10% for that amount of money. But JP Morgan said, there's got to be a better way to make money here. So they started selling 1 share of 1,000,000. And they used celebrities to start pumping or punting these shares. And then JP Morgan and his buddies started taking a commission on selling these things. But unfortunately, up until the 29th of October 1929, there were 2 sets of records. There were the accounting statements that the companies would use to manage their business, and there were accounting statements that they would share with the public. Never the twain shall meet. Sorry. Oh, there we go. And so the Fed said, no more. Mandatory financial audit. Can you tell me when we got to the point of the mandatory sustainability audit? Because if you can, please let me know, because it hasn't happened. In some places, it's starting to happen, like in India, with the BRSR. So at the end of this year, the top 500 companies in India must now produce a sustainability report, and certain elements of its data must be assured. In France, there's requirements for this. It's starting to trickle down, but everywhere else, it's a recommendation, and that recommendation has been around since I've been around. I've been doing sustainability assurance since 1999. Since we got the very first client, I was at PwC at the time, and Talisman Energy, a Canadian oil company, hired us to provide assurance over their first corporate citizenship report. Because they were operating in Sudan during a U.S. embargo, and the Presbyterian churches of the United States was suing them on the premise that Talisman was supporting human rights abuses in Sudan. And Talisman was like, whoa, no, we're not. Not doing anything of the likes. In fact, we're taking government ministers to Canada, to Dalhousie University in Halifax, and we're teaching them about human rights. Talisman was also responsible for 20% of all of the overseas development assistance that was going into Sudan at the time. But nobody believed them. And so they said, what should we do? And I said, Canada has the International Code of Conduct for Canadian businesses operating overseas. Talisman was a signatory to this Code of Conduct, which said, if you're a Canadian company, when you go to an emerging market, you have to continue to operate as if you're in Canada. You can't just drop your standards. You can't become Kabila 2. You have to continue to operate ethically. You have to respect human rights. You have to commit to the communities, ensure fair distribution of wealth. What quote unquote fair is another issue. But they said, but there were 14 elements. And so I said to Talisman, why don't you write a corporate citizenship report? And then we, as PwC, will take the 14 elements of that code of conduct and we'll audit what you say about those principles. And that's exactly what we did. And in 2000, their first report came out, and Talisman was praised for this wonderful report. And PwC was mocked mercilessly. Because they said, how can these accountants, this bunch of accountants, sitting in their ivory towers, going the wrong way here. How can this bunch of accountants sitting in their ivory towers provide assurance over what's going on in Sudan? What they hadn't done is they hadn't read the assurance statement, which said where we were and what we did. To be brutally honest, I got arrested for being an American spy. I had the living crap kicked out of me. I had my fingernails removed. I had my teeth knocked out. I was waterboarded. And CAMAF, our medical insurance, was like, well, we're not replacing your teeth because that's just, what do I call it? Cosmetic surgery? Yeah, it wasn't so cosmetic to me. I wanted to chew meat. But literally, we were in the field. And so That was the birth of sustainability assurance, but at the time it was called reputation assurance. Because sustainability, if it's about one thing, it's about your reputation. And you have to understand that your reputation can be calculated in terms of share value. Not in share price, but in something we refer to as trade discount. So the difference between what your peers are trading at in terms of things like a PE ratio and what you're trading at. And if you're trading below what your peers are trading at, then you have a trade discount and you have to figure out why. And 9 times out of 10, it has something to do with your reputation. At the time, I was doing a lot of stuff on the social side, but I have a background in science. I have 2 of the most useless undergraduate degrees on the face of the planet. So don't ask me what you should study to become a sustainability practitioner. Because I literally am probably the only person you'll ever meet who has a degree in cockfighting. I literally studied how chickens fight. But I got my MBA in corporate social responsibility before there was such a thing. To the point where in 1998, when I was defending my thesis, I nearly failed because 2 of the 3 profs that were reviewing my thesis said, excellent report, well-researched, well-written, wrong faculty. You should be doing this in geography. There's no business case for sustainability. Yeah. They're not teaching anymore. But I went out and I actually started what became reputation assurance, and I have been doing it longer than anybody else on the face of the planet. And part of being the cowboy, part of being the Canadian, part of being the guy who just never grows up. I'm like Peter Pan with cowboy boots on. Right? I really don't know how to bite my tongue. When I believe companies are doing something wrong, I will point it out. Somebody, and you're just going to excuse my language here, folks, somebody at some point in time needs to call bullshit when bullshit needs to be called. That's my job. And so I go ahead, and I've been working with the standards since the beginning. So the GRI standards, I still have my draft copy of the GRI standards that was issued in March 1999. They were first published in 2000. I was one of their speakers at their very first conference in Amsterdam and then was never allowed to speak again because I juggled 3 cabbages on the stage in front of 5,000 people. And the CEO of the GRI said that I wasn't taking it seriously enough. I have been doing this so long that everybody else who was doing it when I did it is long gone. Literally, some of them are dead. But nobody's been doing it as long as I have, and so I'm very passionate about this field. Because the GRI guidelines came out in 2000, but Sasol had its first environmental report assured in 1998. And it was because a couple of the people who were working at Sasol back in 1998 were on the committee that was working towards developing the GRI guidelines. And so KPMG did an assurance statement, horrible statement, but in 1998, before there were any standards for reporting or assurance. Accountability came out with its standard back in 2009 because the GRI was recommending assurance since the first GRI guidelines. Before G2, before G3, G4, and then the GRI standards. Because we had 3 levels of reporting. A, B, C. Well, it's actually C, B, A. But we actually had 6. We had C, C+, B, B+, A+, where the plus meant that you had your data assured. This is going back to 2000. But they didn't actually provide a standard. The standard was written by accountability because the accountancy firms were the first ones to get into this space. And what do accountancy firms do with their assurance statements? Protect themselves. The ISAE 3000 is one of the 2 most commonly used standards. And in the ISA E3000 standard, your assurance statement must end with, nothing's come to our attention to lead us to believe that the information is not correct. Huh? Do you know that I could come to your office and I could put a chair right here and I could sit down and I could sit in front of your office for a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, whatever. And at the end of that 3 weeks, I could then write the statement. As long as nobody came to me and told me that there's something wrong, I could write the statement and say, hey, look, nothing came to my attention to make me believe that the information is not correct. Like, how is that useful to stakeholders? What stakeholders need is positive affirmation that the information is fair and factual. And that's where the AA1000 came in. What we've seen in South Africa, so I'm in the middle of writing a report. I'll be happy to share it with you in the next couple of days when I'm finished. I've literally been sitting here writing it, where I'm doing my latest update on ESG assurance in South Africa. Because as of the financial reporting period 2024, so from January to December 2024, 23.5% of all the JSE listed companies now get assurance. Most of that assurance is coming from the accountancy firms, and most of that assurance is crap. It's literally extremely expensive and not value adding beyond the logo. How many people are here from one of the big four? Don't be afraid. I won't attack you. None of you. Oh, good. The big four, I literally just had job interviews with the big four in Canada, KPMG and PwC, and they'll never touch me. They'll never hire me. But I would love to be back with those firms because I worked with them. I worked with PwC for 4 years and then KPMG for 3 years. Do you know what those companies have that I don't have in my tiny little company? A global brand that everybody knows. So companies will ask them for assurance just so they can get that logo on the assurance statement. They do not pay attention to what's in the assurance statement, and more importantly, what's in the management reporting that leads to that assurance statement. And I can prove it to you. There are 4 types of assurance, 3 plus a combination. You have assertion-based assurance. This is what I was talking about with the Talisman case. They said we're not, causing any human rights abuses. We tested those assertions. There's content-based assurance. This is what the GRI was talking about. And then there's indicator-based assurance. Sorry. Where am I supposed to be pressing this thing? Whoop. Sorry? Yeah, I'm pressing the bottom, but it's not working. Okay, so content-based assurance. So this is where the GRI was like, have someone check to make sure you're including enough of the GRI. Useless assurance. Indicator-based assurance. What you really want is a combination of assertion and indicator. Yeah, we can do the content stuff, but it's really not value-adding. It's more to pat yourselves on the back to make sure that you can say, yes, we looked at the GRI guidelines, the GRI standards. Yes, we looked at SASB. Yes, we looked at IFRS, whatever. But the indicator-based assurance, this is the most common. The most effective is the combined. Because what you want is you want people to go and check the data properly. One thing to remember here is that there's a difference between audit, verification, and assurance. Because audit means test the accuracy of the data. You can test the accuracy and the reliability if I'm assuming you're going to go ahead and test that there's policies, procedures, systems, and controls in place to the data is always accurate. It's not accurate by dumb luck. But what you also need is you need consistency and completeness. You need to know that the definitions that you're using for water consumption is similar to the way everybody else is defining water. Because I was at a Canadian mining company in Namibia in the middle of the desert, and they were reporting 0 water consumption. Gold mining company doing exploration and drilling, using a great big 22,000 liter Bowser truck, water truck, to take water out of the ground, drive it from point A to point B, mix it with chemicals, and then pump it down underground to cool the drill. And their argument was, their definition of water consumption was, that it came out of the ground and then went back into the ground, therefore we didn't use any. What? Number one, they were contaminating the bloody stuff with chemicals to turn it into a coolant. Number two, they were taking it from there and putting it over there. Two different water sources. So they weren't putting it back to where they took it from. And then there's the issue of, why were you using to cool down your drills? What happens when you cool down a drill with water? Evaporation. So clearly the water was being consumed. And so they were getting assurance, quote unquote assurance, from an accountancy firm that was using junior article clerks who didn't know what water consumption really means. They were just taking what the company said about water consumption and checking the numbers. Does the sum of the parts equal the whole? If yes, then we're fine. Nothing's come to my attention. Right? You can't do that. With the accountability, you actually have to look at more than just the data. You all know the difference between a verb and a noun? We all know that cowboy is not just a noun, it's also an adjective. Right? Because I may be a cowboy, but I am a cowboy. But as an assurance provider, you're not assuring the reporter, the noun. You're assuring the reporting, the verb, of which the reporter is only part of the process. You have to make sure there's policies, procedures, systems, and controls to make sure the data is accurate, consistent, complete, and reliable. You must go ahead and check for stakeholder engagement, i.e. the principle of inclusivity. You must make sure there's the principle of materiality, i.e. pay attention to that which is most important. You must look at responsiveness. Are the stakeholders being properly informed of your performance after you've engaged them about things? And then impact. So what? Impact is all about the so what. Because if you can't tell me what the so what is of your carbon emissions, then we have a problem. Because I will tell you, the so what of your carbon emissions has nothing to do with the environment. It's a nice little bonus, but it all comes back to dollars and cents. Because for you to reduce your carbon emissions, what do you have to do? You have to reduce your energy consumption. If you reduce your energy consumption, what are you going to reduce? Your expenditure on energy consumption. So you want to pretend to be a greenie, tree-hugging, bunny-loving greenie? Go ahead. But at the end of the day, it all comes back to the dollars and cents. Because the more carbon you save, the more money you save. We have to understand the so what. We also have to look for the principles of neutrality and comparability. Neutrality is, if you're producing a sustainability report, it can't just tell the good stories. It can't just be about all the wonderful things we're doing. Historically, we used to refer to the sustainability reports as poverty pornography. You guys know what that is? Poverty pornography? That's where the CEO goes out and the marketing team takes photo of the CV, handing out Christmas gifts to the kids at Christmas. And then they take that photograph and they put it in the annual report and talk about how wonderful we are. Again, I'm going to use that term. Bullshit. Right? You can't use that stuff. What you've got to do is you've got to use the photograph of the kids who just graduated from your skills development program. The ones who are actually getting through high school with the matric scores they need to get into university, or the university degrees they need in order to get the jobs, or the skills development programs within your company to be promoted. Those are the stories you must talk about. And if you're not getting it right, balance. Figure out what's going wrong, figure out how you're going to fix it, and include it in your sustainability report. Because if you don't, nobody's going to believe your report. It has to be balanced. The principle of comparability, that goes back to this whole thing about the data. Whoops. Because we have all sorts of platitudes. My favorite one is this one, we're committed to the health and safety of our employees. But then you find out that companies are killing employees. Give you an example. ShopRite. Y'all know who ShopRite is? Right? Do you know what 2020 is? In South Africa, we have 2020, which is where they have the little motorbikes, and you can go onto the internet and order your food, and it gets delivered to your house or on your phone or whatever. Last year, they had 20 2020 drivers killed, but they're not reporting those deaths because they're contractors. And so what ShopRite is saying in the report is we're committed to the health and safety of our employees. What they're not saying is, as long as they're not contractors, then we don't give a shit. Knock yourself out, get killed, not our problem. We have to pay attention to the platitudes that companies are actually spewing, and we actually have to measure things like the annual reporting on first aid cases, medical treatment cases, lost time injuries, and fatalities. We have to break the platitude down into KPIs, or what I refer to as SKPIs, the KSPIs, the key sustainability performance indicators. Because that's what you measure. That which is not measured is not managed. You have to measure that stuff, and you have to figure out how to get it right. So as I say, we review the sustainability reporting of every single JSE-listed company. This past year's research population sample was 234. I can tell you that it breaks my heart to know that there are only 234 discrete listed companies on the JSE, because when I started doing this research in 2009, we had 355. South Africa's listed environment is falling to pieces. But we have 234 companies. We review the sustainability reporting of all of them, and then we calculate scores for them. There's an overall SDTI score, but then we have scores for standard disclosures, economic performance, governance, labor, health, safety. What's the first thing that you notice when you look at this? So this is a table of all of the average scores per sector. What's the first thing you notice about this? Governance? What about governance? Absolutely. Like, they're not necessarily all getting it right, because what's the sector? Electronics and electrical equipment has an average of 68.94%. What are we on now? King 5, King 6? Where are we at? King 5? Yet, the information that is based in the questions to come up with that governance score is based on King. Yet, not all companies are getting 100%. But you can see that they're paying a lot more attention to governance, right? What about health and safety? Ha! What about the environment? Ha! And we're talking about companies like, the top row there is metals and mining. The average environmental SDTI score is only 50.52%, which means that the companies are only given half the data they ought to be giving. That, to me, is disgusting. But what's really exciting is if you understand the Hawthorne effect. Hawthorne was a researcher back in the 50s, and he said that you could change behavior in a workforce if you, A, told them what behavior needed to change, B, told them what change needed to occur, C, monitored their behavior, and D, made sure they understood that you monitored their behavior. And so what he did is he went to a factory, and he had them put a window in overlooking the factory. And he would get the MD of the factory, or the GM or whatever, and the GM would come, and he'd come with a clipboard and a piece of paper. And the guy would be there, and he'd be doing his grocery list. He'd be writing love letters to his girlfriend or his wife, whatever it was. But everybody down there thought that he was monitoring their behavior. And because they saw him, they were changing their behavior. And so they started to improve. But then Hawthorne came back up, and he blocked up the window. What do you think happened? Anybody? It went back to the norm. Do you know why? Because he hadn't let the window stay there for long enough. You basically need 4 weeks to change organizational behavior. So if you keep the window there for at least 4 weeks, you monitor the behavior, people will change, and the new behavior will become the new norm. And so for 16 years I've been doing this, and I can show you examples of companies where their sustainability data performance has improved massively. But more importantly, it's not about just having numbers. It's about having the right numbers. Because here's the thing. Metals and mining, lost time injury frequency rate. So, of the, 25 companies, 25 of the 28 JSE listed mining companies provide lost time injury frequency rate data within their reporting. They at least provide the number of lost time injuries. So you can calculate a lost time injury frequency rate. 3 of them don't. And it begs the question, why not? Is it a governance problem? They don't have the policies, procedures, systems, and controls in place to be able to monitor and measure their performance? Is it a performance issue? Is it that the data is so bad they wouldn't want anybody to find out about it? Or is it a values issue? They just don't give a damn. They're going to bother measuring the stuff and putting it out in the public domain. But here's the thing. The average lost time injury frequency rate for the metals and mining sector, way down here, 0.305, compared to the JSE average of 0.349. So what does that tell us? That in South Africa, the listed mining companies are safer than many of the other industries on the JSE. Yet, anybody not consider mining unsafe? Quite a dangerous activity, right? You know what industry is even more dangerous? Retail. 7 retailers with an average lost time injury frequency rate of 1.543. It means that the average JSE listed retail company is 5 times more dangerous than the average mining company. Are you kidding me? Yes. Clearly, too much food, not so good. But you know what makes this worse? Is that these companies are not reporting their contractor stats. And so this year at ShopRite, they were reporting their fatalities but not including them in their lost time injury frequency rate. This year, they're not going to be reporting any of their fatalities, their contractor fatalities. Because why? Because Woolworths and Pick n Pay don't do it. So remember the International Code of Conduct for Canadian businesses operating overseas, which said you stay at the high level, you don't drop to the low level? Well, ShopRite's decided to drop to the low level. So, their data is bullshit. It's wrong. But you know what's horrible? They were assured. Well, ShopRite wasn't, but Pick n Pay was, and Woolworths was, and Dis-Chem were, and all 3 of those companies have the 3 highest lost time injury frequency rates in the retail sector. And in their assurance statements, guess what you find? Well, nothing's come to our attention to lead us to believe that the information is not correct. What a shareholder wants to know, what a stakeholder wants to know, is that somebody's commenting on how tragic it is that Pick n Pay is 7 times more dangerous than the average mining company. 7 times. It's actually twice as dangerous as the most dangerous mining company, Harmony Gold. And Harmony Gold is including their contractors. Pick n Pay is not. So why the heck have those 3 companies paid assurance providers to get assurance for their sustainability information when I can tell you for 100% certainty that the data is incorrect? Because nothing's come to our attention to lead us to believe that the information is not correct. Which is also bullshit, because I told all 3 assurance providers that they should be paying attention to this. So something did come to their attention. So one of the things you really must understand, is that to be an effective assurance provider, how come I'm not going again? Can you press forward there? Oh, here. Chartered accountants make for great assurance providers. Can make for great assurance providers. I'm not a CA, but I cut my teeth in the CA firms, PwC and KPMG. So I learned the audit protocol. I learned what it means to keep records, to dig. By nature, I'm inquisitive. But I'm also a machinist by original trade. I'm also a retailer by original trade. Before I got into this, I only started this job when I was 30. My first day in South Africa, my first full day in South Africa, which is the day I got my job at PwC in Johannesburg, was my 30th birthday. I've been doing this since I was 30. So yes, I'm 56. I know I look much younger. But I cut my teeth in the accounting firms that expected me to have the rigor. But the problem is, accountancy clerks do not have experience in the field. If you're not going to hire them, like one of the colleagues that I worked with, one of the best assurance providers I ever worked with, Jen Smith in London, she had a PhD in medieval burial rites. Unless you're working for a funeral home, not a whole lot of use there. But this is the thing, you need a wide variety of experiences. You need people like Madeleine, who's a scientist, right? You need these sorts of people because they can tell you what water consumption really means, what health and safety really means, what lost time injury frequency rate really means. You need to diversify the experience within the teams. If you're not going to hire them, co-opt them. Because two of my clients are UK-based oil companies, one listed, one not listed. I go to oil platforms off the coast of Africa and South America for these clients. I take a chemical process engineer every single time I go. Not because I can't do the work, but because a stakeholder wants to know that a properly qualified individual has participated in getting the information right. And so that's my song. I hope you've enjoyed it. Don't forget, I was the one who gave you the sweet, so vote for me. Oh, question, yeah?
I'm just interested in the retail sector.
Yep.
The retail sector. Which areas actually do have this mentality? I'm just thinking of retail store.
Distribution centers. So the question that was asked here was, where within retail do you get these fatalities? So right now, the number one source of fatalities are these Uber drivers, these vehicles that go out and they deliver your food. In ShopRite, it's 2020. Woolworths has its own service. Pick and Pay has its own service. Dischem has its own service. But that's one, because these people are not properly trained to be motorcycle riders. They're not given safe vehicles to ride. The vehicles aren't maintained properly. They're not paid enough to properly maintain these things. And then, of course, there's the challenge of driving a motorcycle in Joburg, which I do only because I have a death wish. But the actual answer to your question is distribution centers. Distribution centers with really high shelving, and you get contractors in there who don't pay attention to the rules, and they're riding forklifts. And the forklifts have like a vehicle inhibitor, so a speed limiter. And so you can only go so fast, unless you go in reverse. Because the speed inhibitor doesn't work in reverse. So the guys race around like they're in the F1 in reverse. And they prang the shelves, and stuff falls down, and everybody, because of the heights, is instructed to wear a hard hat, even though the hard hat is wearing you for its protection. It's not going to protect you. But that's where it happens. And the problem is the companies are not managing their contractor health and safety the same way they would do so for their employees.
So I had another question from your presentation about including contractors. I think I've worked for a company where we were guilty of doing that, where we had distribution being done by contractors.
Yep.
And the mining and quarrying as well was being done by contractors. And our argument then was that in terms of what we effect or what we direct, our KPIs didn't need to include the contractors because they would have been covered elsewhere. That was the
That was the thinking.
That was the thinking.
Yeah.
Were we really wrong? Or
100% wrong. So wrong. Because you can outsource many things, your reputation isn't one of them. Your health and safety is another one. Because you can't take your most dangerous activities and give them to a bunch of people, then wash your hands of it. Because they're still human beings. Because what you're saying as an organization then is, we're not actually worried. We don't care about employees. What we care about is how much legal trouble we're going to get into. So if we can get away with having people killed because they work for a contractor and not for us directly, then we'll hire contractors. Well, really, is that what helps you sleep at night? So companies have literally been criticized for this. Anglo-American, many years ago, most of their fatalities were coming from an activity called shaft sinking. So anybody's ever done mining, you'll know that one of the most dangerous parts of mining is when you sink a new shaft. You drill a new hole, and then you give it its arms so you can go off to the seams at different levels. And most of the fatalities were happening within this activity. And so Anglo-American decided to go to those people and say, hey guys, why don't you start your own company? We'll give you the equipment, we'll hire you to do the work, but you guys go start your own company and then we'll contract you. Do you know what the company's name is? It's a listed company. Shaft Sinkers. And they went off and they hired them, and then all the fatalities were happening with shaft sinkers, and Anglo stopped talking about them. And Anglo shareholders said, no, you can't. You cannot absolve yourself of the responsibility simply because now they have a different company logo. They're still doing your work on your site for your customers. They're still your fatalities. Good, thank you. Sorry about the time, guys.
Thank you so much, Michael. Thank you so much. We just want to take this moment for the next 5 minutes to just honor the speakers that presented to us yesterday. And so I'll just call upon the team to come with the gifts that they have so that we can show that. So right now I'll call upon the CEO for ICAS, and I'll call upon CEO IODZ, and I'll call upon CEO for INSAF to help us present these gifts.
Still prefer cold water. But yesterday we had that little explosion. So.
Okay, Tim, yes. Okay. For now, this is not from yesterday, but from today, the first presentation that we have, Mr. Michael Ree. Oh, that's great. And so the sweets worked.
Thank you very much.
And then we have a small apple tree, just to go with to South Africa. Small apple tree, yes.